Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our Tuesday live stream to discuss digital transformation topics. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stage of digital transformation success. Like I said, this is a Tuesday live stream. We have it every week at the same time with different guests covering different topics related to digital transformation. This interview and this discussion we're going to have today will become part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast, which is released every Wednesday. So a week from tomorrow, the episode that's released for Transformation Ground Control will feature this interview. So by watching this live stream, you're actually part of the production of the podcast. So thank you for joining here today. The other thing is we are streaming to several platforms today. So we're streaming to LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. So if you're watching on any of those platforms, please feel free to chime in with questions as we get going with our guest here, who I'm going to introduce in just a moment. Our topic today is artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence can improve supply chain management. So that's what we're going to discuss here today, which I know two angles of that, artificial intelligence and supply chain management, are of interest to a lot of people, and especially in today's day and age with supply chain bottlenecks and disruptions in the world. It's a particularly interesting topic as far as how we can use data and artificial intelligence to better enable better and more effective supply chain management. Before I introduce our guest, one last logistical thing. If you don't mind just dropping in the chat where you're joining from today. We tend to have a pretty global audience, a very interesting and diverse audience. So I always love to see where the audience is joining from today. So if you don't mind just dropping in the chat where you're joining from, that would be wonderful, and I would appreciate that in advance. And also, as we get going in the conversation, please jump in with questions along the way. You can drop it in the chat at any point, and we'll pull questions from the live audience here as we get going. So with that all being said, our guest today to discuss this topic of how artificial intelligence can improve supply chain management is Liren Hasan, who's the CEO and founder of Aporia, which is an AI monitoring software. So Liren, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
And speaking of a global audience, tell us where you're joining us from today. What part of the world are you in?
Cool. Yeah. So I'm usually traveling, but I'm based in Tel Aviv, Israel. So I'm currently joining from Tel Aviv.
Perfect. I appreciate you being here late in the day in Israel here today. But just to start, maybe tell us a little bit about your background, and then I'll ask you a question about Aporia and what Aporia does. But tell us about you. Who are you? How'd you grow up in this space?
Cool. Sounds good. So I'm Liran, CEO of Aporia. I've spent about over 20 years in software engineering. So I really started coding when I was 10 years old. Then worked for a couple of companies as a software engineer, software architect. And in one of my previous positions, I was leading the architecture of the whole ML infrastructure of a startup company that was later acquired by Microsoft. So really had first-hand experience running machine learning models at scale on large scale of data, as well as for plenty of use cases. Um, I just had to the first hand experiencing what it's like to run these systems in production, all the fun stuff and the challenges that come with it. That's kind of what led me to start Aporia.
Great. That's a good, interesting upbringing in the world. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes and evolutions in technology in that time. Tell us about Aporia. What does Aporia do? I know I mentioned it's an AI monitoring software. Maybe just help us unpack that a bit and understand more detail what the company does and what the product does.
Cool. So as you mentioned, Aporia is an observability platform dedicated for machine learning models. So if you think about it, AI, machine learning as technology is being adopted across industries, right? Retail is one of them, e-commerce, financials, automotive. It's really becoming everywhere, and it affects all of us as consumers and as businesses. Now, in a similar way to software, which have bugs and doesn't work sometimes, the same happens for AI. And while there are great solutions to monitor and track traditional software workloads, they do not apply for data and machine learning models. So companies who utilize and leverage machine learning are being left with these areas as huge blind spot, right? In case they might misperform or won't perform as accurate as you might expect. So this is exactly where Aporia comes to the picture. Aporia is a SaaS solution that allows companies to visualize. So you can have dashboards and see what models you have in production, what predictions they're making for the business. And also, Aporia constantly tracks the data and the models. So when something is starting to go off, when performance is starting to degrade, when there's kind of a drift, whether it's in the model or in the data, so Aporia will alert you upon that. So instead of being reactive, getting to know about the issues from your customers, or when it's too late and you've already lost some plenty amount of revenues, you can get to know about it as soon as it starts to happen. So this is what Aporia is all about in a nutshell.
So does Aporia work with certain types of software to pull the data that it's analyzing or monitoring? Like, how does that work, or how does it integrate or tie to other systems you might already have in production?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question because um, when looking, especially in large organizations, you will find that different teams are using different technologies to develop their models. Some of them will be legacy, some of them will be new ones. And actually, one of the main use cases of Aporia for large organizations is being able to connect to all these different data sources, all these different types of machine learning models, and making Aporia this one centralized place where you can see all the different types of models running in production. So, just to summarize the answer to your question, Aporia is agnostic to the type of model you're running and also from what database it is coming from or is this using.
Got it. So if I have disparate systems and or multiple systems running my operations, it could pull from those multiple data sources to create these
Exactly.
models or to monitor the models. Okay, great. Well, I guess to start then, just to sort of keep at this high level to start, and then we'll dive into a little bit more detail. But why is artificial intelligence so important, especially in the retail, demand planning, and supply chain management fields in general? Why is AI so important or becoming so important?
Yeah. So I think AI is becoming very important, not only in this industry, but in general across all industries, as I mentioned before. But specifically, when talking about retail, about demand forecasting, um, the ability to forecast, to have a good prediction, could mean a lot for the business, right? So retailers live in a market which is constantly changes. You have different market trends, you have holidays, you have COVID that happening, all sort of things that by the end of the day affect the way consumers behave, and therefore that affects your business. So if you are able to predict properly some market trends, for example, you might adopt your pricing strategy,
Right.
right? And as a result, you get some more revenues. You might adapt your marketing campaigns and leverage new trends that are upcoming. You might change the way you build stocks in warehouses. The same goes for personalizing our consumers' experience when we shop online, for example. Um, what recommendation do we get for product? We can take Amazon, for example. 35% of their revenues are coming thanks to the recommendations their machine learning models are providing with their end users. So this is, and when you think about it in terms of numbers and US dollar value, we're talking about significant amount of value for the businesses. So I guess this is why it becomes so important.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's maybe two layers of importance there. One is the sort of how do you keep the supply chain and the supply in line with demand? So as you anticipate demand better, how can you keep supply in line there, or aligned with that demand? But then there's also the more opportunistic side of it. It sounds like, which is how do we sell more to based on machine learning models, or just knowing our customers or having that customer data to be able to anticipate what their needs might be. Is that a fair summary of what you just said?
Yeah, exactly. Well, there are a few more aspects like chatbots and virtual assistants, so you can provide with better customer support experience to your users. Also, shipping. We got used in the last few years that we can order something and get it by tomorrow, the latest. It's not obvious, and a lot of it is just thanks to the ability to optimize shipping routes, for example. So this is just another example of how AI is really impacting this sector.
Right. Right. Especially when there's disruptions all along the way with shipping and even just freight. Once it's once freight's off the water, just optimizing how you get it from whatever port it's at to the warehouse and all that stuff. Um, well, good. Well, before I continue with my questions, just to turn to the audience here and look at where people are joining from today, I want to thank everyone for dropping in the chat where you're at today. We have Malcolm on LinkedIn from the UK. We have Ryan on YouTube from Denver. Kyler's joining from Colorado, Grand Junction in the US. Sam from Spain. We have Dallas from Utah. Leo from Ohio, Pakistan, Canada, UK, Toronto, Germany, Ivory Coast, New York, Reston, Virginia, Germany, Atlanta. A lot of different places people are joining from today. Enrique from Chile just joined as well. So thank you everyone for being here today. And like I said, if you have questions for Liren and I, please drop those in the chat and we'll pull those up. Um, here's a question that I think for me would perhaps help just understand what you just described, Liren. This is from Pasha over on YouTube. And Pasha asks, this is not AI, just the old school alert system. What are you precisely using for AI to discover for your user before a specialist finds it? How does it become a leading indicator? Does that question make sense to you? Or is that something we can unpack a bit, maybe to explain how AI perhaps is not an old school alert system and how it's different than an old school alert system?
Sure. So, well, first, yes, you can definitely use some old school algorithms and heuristics to predict demand, for example, right? You don't have to use machine learning. I think machine learning as technology could bring a lot of value in some of the use cases. And by the way, my personal recommendation will be evaluate all the different technologies and alternatives that you have and go with the best one that suits your needs. And AI is not the right tool for everything. So choosing the right tool is important. Um, what's the difference between AI, machine learning, and kind of old school heuristics? So the main difference is that in heuristics, we have a data scientist or a software engineer who take a look on the data, they learn the data, and based on their familiarity with the data, probably with some domain expertise as well, they will be creating an algorithm, a set of rules that can be followed in order to predict what will be the demand, for example, in a specific country for a specific item. Now, while that might work just great for certain use cases, if you are Walmart and you have millions of items, and for each one of them you have different order history, right, for different countries, and you want to achieve good performance and predicting the demand for each one of these particular items, then it becomes very, very complex, right? Because we're talking about enormous amounts of data. It's not something a human can just go one by one or take a look at this data and say, okay, this heuristic works well. I think this is when the true power of AI comes to the picture. So essentially, what you're doing with machine learning, you take historical data. For example, let's say the purchase history from the past 2 years for each item. And then you don't specify yourself what is the logic and what is the heuristic, but you rather use machine learning algorithms that they mimic the way we learn. So they learn the behavior of the data,
Mm,
and that's what is called model training. By the end of this process, you'll have a model, which is usually kind of the brain, you can say, or a new function that is able to get historical data and based on that predict what will be the demand for a specific item.
mm.
So I think this is where AI shines and where it becomes very, very powerful. It can actually achieve things that beforehand was never possible to do with traditional software engineering, or it was just very, very difficult or very expensive.
Right. And so it's moving beyond just alerting that there's an outage or a product is out of stock. It's anticipating when that product might be out of stock if you weren't to order more. It's more of the using past history to not just alert, but to predict the future. Is that a layman's term summary that helps?
Yep.
Good. Now, I know we're talking quite a bit about retail supply chain management. That's sort of where we started the conversation. But actually, this is a good question here from Dan over on LinkedIn. It's similar to a question I had for you as well, which is, do you have AI software to recommend for manufacturing? And maybe more specifically, does your product and AI in general support manufacturing operations as well? All the planning of raw materials and production and staffing, all that stuff. Can AI help with those sorts of challenges and problems as well?
Okay, so our solution. Okay, so our solution it does cover manufacturing use cases, but it is important to be clear about that. Our solution is not for developing. It's not a kind of it. It doesn't create the models for you. So as for AI software for manufacturing, there are plenty of these. I'll be happy, to take it offline and to share a few specific recommendations.
Got it. Okay. But in general, AI can be used to, or there's AI solutions that can help with manufacturing and production planning, resource planning, that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Um, Here's a question. You could tell me if this is a question that's relevant or one you can answer. I know I cannot answer this question, but maybe you can, Alarin. And this is from Hamid over on LinkedIn. And Hamid asks, is there specific mathematical models that prove their capabilities in supply chain and shipping as it relates to AI?
Yeah. So it's a good question. So it's a good question of what does it mean prove their capabilities, right? So I don't want to say something that will be incorrect. What I can say is that we are actively working with retail customers and customers that are working on and utilizing machine learning algorithms for supply chain as well as for shipping. Other specific algorithms, there are a bunch of them. And we also find that sometimes different data science teams and different organizations for the very same use case might use different algorithms. If to be more specific, I can share that we do see a lot of recommender systems. We do see a lot of use of decision trees, XGBoost, stuff like that. We do see that a lot.
Okay, great. And then here's a question from Kyler on LinkedIn. As an organization, how do you know if you need or could benefit from AI software?
So if you're an organization, I'd say with over 100 people, you probably can benefit from AI software. Uh, the question is, when does it make sense to do that, and in what part of the business? And the reason I'm saying it is because you can use it in marketing, right? So you can predict the LTV of your customers, and you can adopt your marketing campaigns accordingly. Um, you can utilize it for customer success. Like, you can do it for a lot of things and a lot of parts in the business. Um, how do you prioritize that? How do you find the first use cases? So, in order to achieve success with an AI project, especially the first ones, it's crucial to have enough data. High quality data is crucial for success of these projects. So therefore, I'd say find out in what use cases you have a lot of relevant data. It might be your CRM, right? You might have a lot of metadata about your potential customers, about your leads. And then you can utilize AI, for example, to prioritize these leads. So this will be one example. So finding this first use case, I think it's really important in order to achieve success. And based on that, you can then replicate it and find more use cases within the organization.
So is AI in general, is AI like a muscle that an organization needs to develop? So in other words, if you identify one problem, like you just defined a few examples there, you define one specific problem, you solve it with AI, you build the models, you refine it. Is that sort of like a competency you need to build as an organization to learn and figure out how to use AI and use the data better?
Yeah. So what happens a lot of times is that each organization has different needs for AI. Why? Because their data is different, the business KPIs are different. And that's why a lot of times just trying to utilize or to buy a generic solution from the market doesn't work well. And that's where you'll see a lot of organizations that are just building in house data science and machine learning practices. So, how do you do that? You need to hire data scientists as well as ML engineers and to build a team that will be responsible for creating and leading these initiatives.
Right. Right. So just like you might have a data management team, a master data management function within an organization, you may also start to build out an AI function as well. People that can, work with that data, build the models, refine the models, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Because why do we gather data? A lot of companies in the past decade have collected tons of data, but and we are paying a lot of that, right, for the storage, for the compute. So why do we do that? We do that in order to gain value out of these data, to mine these data and gain some value. How do you get value? You do some BI, you do analytics, and you use machine learning. These are the free, I call it the value layer of the data stack.
Right.
So yes.
Okay. And that actually leads me to another sort of fundamental question. This is me as a person that does not understand artificial intelligence or data science very well yet. But that question is what is the difference between artificial intelligence and machine learning? And how are they different and how are they similar? How are they related?
Well, if it's written with Python code, it's probably machine learning. If it's on a PowerPoint deck, it will be AI. No, I'm kidding. So AI is more of a concept about how can we mimic certain human behaviors, like learning, for example, learning and identifying patterns, um, and implement it using technology, using software, using hardware. This is AI. This is artificial intelligence. Machine learning is part of AI. In a way, it's kind of an implementation for AI, and it's a set of algorithms for recommendation, for classification, for prediction on the future. That essentially the way they work is they work usually on top of a lot of existing data. They learn this data, try to find some patterns within it or anomalies, and then you can utilize this software for other use cases. So I hope it makes sense the difference between AI and machine learning.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like they're different, but they're very much related. And
Yeah.
in in that machine learning then is really what is processing data and anticipating what the data might do in the future. Is that a fair summary, or how would you maybe correct that statement?
I say it's pretty accurate. Yeah, you have a lot of data. You want to predict how something will behave in the future. Yes, that will definitely be one use case. Another use case will be, well, I have a lot of pictures of cats and dogs. I want to classify which picture is a cat, which picture is a dog. It might sound silly, but we all use it when we use Google Photos and we search for either within our personal photos. And if you haven't tried it, I highly recommend you to try because it's really cool and fun just to search for your photos for your cat or your dog, and it's pretty amazing the way that Google is able to do that. So these
Yeah.
kind of things, yeah.
Okay. So on my phone, when I get these random recommendations of pictures of my wife or pictures of my dog, and it's sort of a collage or a series of pictures. That's machine learning that's figured out what's in the pictures. That's kind of recommending that to me to view. Is that fair?
Yeah, so it's an interesting example because actually there is more than one model behind what you just described. There will be at least one model to classify what object is in the picture: a dog, a cat, a person. There might be another model to identify who's that person is. Is it your wife? Is it Eric? Is it your friend? And then based on that, there might be another model for recommending which photos should be collaged together and would be interesting for you to see.
Interesting. Okay.
Right? Because if,
Yeah.
if Google will just take a bunch of screenshots that they took from your phone and will create a collage out of that, probably you won't be that interested in that.
Right. So I think the takeaway here is that AI and machine learning are probably affecting our lives more than we realize. You've talked about Google, you've talked about photo recommendations, Amazon's recommendations on purchases. There's a lot of interesting use cases in how machine learning has sort of permeated our lives in ways we may not even recognize. Um, so, given that AI and machine learning is becoming more prominent and more relevant in the world, why do retailers have trouble using machine learning models to accurately predict demand? So, you think about today and how there's still stock shortages throughout the world, supply and demand are still not in sync ever since COVID, for the most part, or in many cases. Why is that? Why are retailers having so much trouble using machine learning models to figure out, how to match supply and demand?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And we saw a couple of examples, right, with Macy's and Target that they had some significant changes in their stocks, and we also noticed that some changes in the revenues that might be correlated to that. So, first, the short answer is predicting the future is hard. Okay, like
Mm,
it might sound like machine learning is a magic, but it's not. And it's
right.
not a silver bullet for everything. So predicting the future in general is a difficult task. And when you think about it, predicting demand. So what is affecting demand, right? So when we take machine learning models and we train them to predict the demand of specific items, we do it based on historical data. Now, data changes due to plenty of reasons. I like to split it into three layers that are affecting the data that gets to the model. The first one will be the data pipeline that is constantly changing, new version updates, different engineers working on that, sometimes from even different teams and even different companies. Then you have the application layer. So is it the mobile application that is getting changed or the web application? And the third layer is the real world, which is constantly changing with seasonalities and stuff like that. Maybe just a new tweet or a new post on Instagram made a new shirt very, very popular. So it's very, very difficult to anticipate. And when you think about it, there are so many variables that you cannot take all of them into account, even when you train machine learning model. So this is one of the main challenge. You have to deal with some sort of limited amount of data that you have on the real world. So this is one limitation. And number two, when we talk about demand forecasting specifically, feedback loop usually takes a lot of time. So if beforehand we spoke about Amazon and the recommendation, so for them it's pretty easy to track. We recommended Eric to buy, I don't know, let's say a new laptop or something. Maybe a few hours later, you bought the laptop. They get feedback that the recommendation was good, right?
Right.
With demand forecasting, though, it might take a few months and even quarters until you get these feedback. So we can think about it as a student in school that instead of getting a feedback on weekly basis, they get it only after a couple of months. So the learning rate is becomes worse. So this is two challenges in my opinion, and actually three challenges. So the first one is the limit data that they have. The second is the delayed feedback. And the third one is the constant changing world that they live in. And therefore, as a matter of fact, if something is changing now affecting the demand as we speak, we'll probably get to know about it only in 3, 4 months, which is already too late.
Right. Right. And there's actually a question that builds on what you were just saying. This is from Sam Graham over on LinkedIn. And Sam asks, when a company's sales are affected by seasonality, it can take several years for a demand pattern to emerge. Is it possible to speed up that process?
So it's a very interesting question. That's exactly what Aporia is doing, actually. So the obvious result is, seeing your sales results and say, "Oh shit, we lost some money." So our demand forecasting wasn't correct.
Sure.
But trends are not happening in a single time, right? It's a trend. It takes some time. So, for example, what Aporia is doing, it's tracking the data that gets into the model as well as the predictions, and it's tracking their statistical behavior. So, as a trend is starting to form, you can get alerted upon that. You can
Mm,
then take a deeper dive into wait, let's try to understand what is the new trend, how is it affecting our demand, and then you can accommodate that and adjust your demand or the way you sell or your prices so you can either optimize your margins or your revenues.
right. Okay. Makes total sense. Um, okay. So are there things? So let me come back to something you mentioned. You talked about the different layers of AI, and one of the layers you talked about was data. Do you find that with Aporia's customers, um, that there are data integrity issues that sort of undermine their ability to fully take advantage of machine learning and AI, or is that part of the journey is to not just deploy AI machine learning, but also to make sure your data is clean and accurate?
So I think it's not something that is unique to our customers. I think you see it everywhere. Like
Mm,
really, it's very very challenging and very difficult to keep data clean. And why the reason is very simple. It's just being affected by so many factors, so many people. Uh, so yeah, we do see a lot of data integrity issues, and that's why keeping track on the data, identifying this kind of issues and data integrity changes, it's important to identify them as soon as they start happening.
right. Yeah, it's a great point. And sort of building on this data thread and theme here. This is from Ryan over on LinkedIn. And he asks, in the sales and marketing space, can AI fill in the blanks that occur due to the loss of customer data that has resulted from the large tech companies implementing more stringent privacy rules? And maybe just to broaden that question a little bit, even not just the tech companies, but in Europe with GDPR and just general privacy concerns that organizations and governments and people throughout the world have, is that affecting AI machine learning's ability to have reliable data to build models on in some functional areas?
So it very depends on the specific use case. When we're talking about ads and targeting, like trying to target ads for a specific audience, then the answer is yes. I think all the changes in GDPR, the new regulation, CCPA in California. So a lot of these things are affecting the data that is available from the very beginning, to do all these recommenders, to classify the users. So that creates a new challenge for all these companies and how can they build models on top of this missing data. Um, I do want to relate to the question, can AI fill in the blanks? Well, we can try using AI to fill in the blanks. And here it's important to emphasize again that it's not bulletproof. It might do good work for some of the data points. It might do some poor work for the other data points. So it's really a question of what is satisfactory for the business,
Mm,
um, to work with. So I think it really like I'll be happy to do deep dive into the specific business case and understand exactly what makes sense and what not.
right. Now, how about this is actually a really interesting question. I'm glad Hamid over on LinkedIn asked this because I probably wouldn't have thought to ask you this. But do you think that combining both Internet of Things with AI and supply chain would be the better way to provide more exactitude? And maybe I'll broaden that question a little bit and just say, how does Internet of Things tie into this, or can Internet of Things be an enabler of AI and ML?
Yeah, so Internet of Things is super interesting here because Internet of Things, when you think about it, you have suddenly millions or billions of new sensors that are creating more data, right? It could be
Mm-hmm.
temperature, it could be weight, it could be amount of items on the shelf. So we as society we have plenty of more data to work with. So in that sense, IoT is definitely a huge enabler, in my opinion, to using AI because it allows us to have all these data. And again, more data allow us to create usually better models. Um, so this is for that. Running machine learning models on IoT devices, it's kind of another angle of it. For example, in cars, right? How do you run machine learning models in cars, whether it's for autonomous driving, whether it's you can actually find today already in the US some cars when you drive, they can automatically identify signs on the road. Have you ever had this experience?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, so this is something really cool, and running a machine learning model on an edge device in IoT in a way I can treat a car as an IoT. It's different than running it in the cloud. It comes with some different challenges from an engineering perspective. Uh, but the short answer is yes, there's definitely great connection between IoT and machine learning.
It's a matter though of where and how that data is processed, though. Is that what you're saying? Whether you process it centrally in the cloud or whether it's being processed at the local device or what did you call it? Like at the
Edge
device?
device.
Yeah, the edge device.
Yeah.
Okay, super interesting. And then when we think about AI and machine learning, do customers that you work with typically consider AI as part of an overall digital transformation, whether it's for a retailer or any other organization, or do they go through their digitization process and then deploy AI and machine learning, or is it sort of a mix of both?
I would say it's a mix of both. Some of them are just doing it as part of the digital transformation process. Right? So one of the things they want to do is they have like tons of forms from their customers. So then they digitize all this information, but now they have plenty of data they can work with. So it's great that they digitized all this data, but now they can actually leverage AI and gain a lot of new value that was just impossible before when this data wasn't digitalized.
Hmm.
So we definitely see that connected one with the other.
Okay, makes sense. And do you think that some of the big tech providers, the enterprise technology providers like SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, some of those big ERP enterprise technology providers, they say they have machine learning and AI in their products, and we've seen some signs that maybe there is some AI and machine learning in it. Although I still question whether or not they really have those capabilities. How would you compare what Aporia does to what a big enterprise-wide technology says they already have baked within their technology?
So I think, well, it's usually complement. We work a lot with in-house data science and machine learning teams.
Mm,
So when thinking about it, these teams are highly focused about building new models, improving the existing machine learning models, right, to gain better value for the business. Um, their core business is not to monitor and track and build a monitoring system for these models. So this is where Aporia comes to place. We really help them to realize the value that they are creating. We
mm.
are not the ones building the models. So I think this is actually great complementary to what they're building.
Got it. Okay, so it's not duplicate. It's not either or. It's really building on what they have.
Yeah,
Okay.
and actually, and even more than that. So as we discussed before, there are plenty of use cases, right? Like even within one customers of ours, they usually would have between five to hundreds of different models. So one of the nice things about the Aporia system is the fact that it is highly customizable.
Mm,
So the way it works is usually they will start working with the out of the box defaults of the system, but then each data scientist will customize it to their specific use case and needs. So, for example, they can create different business dashboards for demand forecasting versus recommender system.
okay. Got it. Okay. Here's another great question, and I think what I like about a lot of these questions the audience is asking is they're a asking questions that I'm not thinking of. B, they're asking questions that are tying together multiple technologies, and this is from Deepak in India over on YouTube, and Deepak asks, he's asking about blockchain and AI. How do blockchain and artificial intelligence work together, if at all? Are they related? Do they complement each other? Are they totally unrelated? How do you address the blockchain and AI topic?
So I think that blockchain is very new technology in a way, um, actually much newer than AI, because when looking at AI, what you'll find is that the first algorithms of neural networks, for example, were there from the 1960s. So technology itself from algorithms is not that new as blockchain. Blockchain is much newer. And I think that AI is already being implemented and being used for plenty of use cases, and blockchain is a bit behind in that sense. I know there are plenty of
Mm,
companies who try to leverage that. And in the financial industries, I am familiar with some companies who use blockchain already. At least from my perspective, and again, I have just my angle of reality, so take it with a grain of salt. We didn't see a lot of combination between blockchain and AI as for now.
got it. Okay. All right, that makes sense. Here's a general logistical question. I should have asked you this earlier. This is from Dan on LinkedIn. But what is the website for your company? And so Dan's asking, he didn't catch your name or the company name. So it's Liran Hasan, Liran, and the last name is Hasan, Hason. And the company is spelled Aporia, Aporia. But what is the website address if the audience wants to learn more about Aporia?
Sure. So it's aporia.com, aporia.com.
Got it. Okay. Aporia.com.
And by the way,
Great.
feel free to ping me over LinkedIn. I'm happy to take any questions later.
Perfect. Here's a question from Howray over on LinkedIn. And Howray asks, how would you leverage the predictive power of AI for intermittent demand in project based environments? Have you seen that sort of a use case at Aporia?
So I'm trying to understand what does that mean intermittent demand in a project-based environment.
Maybe just, and I'm not sure if this is the intent of the question, but maybe I'll reframe it as if I run third stage consulting, I run third stage consulting. We have 50 or 60 client projects happening in any given time. We're tracking progress, we're tracking data from these projects. So I don't know if it's intermittent or if it's more maybe diversity of data, different projects with different variables affecting them. Have you seen it? Have you seen AI used in sort of a project management sort of environment where you're anticipating potential bottlenecks or resource constraints, other things that might affect a project?
Oh, definitely, definitely. So I'll tackle this from two angles. One is as your the example you gave, Eric, from the use case, right? There are plenty of use cases like predicting congestion, predicting the timeline of the project, doing utilizing all these kind of things to predict unexpectancies or important items in the project. That would be one use case, which is interesting, but there are others as well. The other angle of the question is kind of from technical perspective, how to tackle that, um, as projects are different one from the other. So that brings an interesting question. Do you take the data from all projects or do you split them and build a machine learning model for each one of them?
Mm,
It highly depends on how much data you have. If you have a lot of data, my recommendation will actually be to use the same algorithm, but build a separate model, train a different model for each project. And then the model will be tailor made for this specific project, meaning that the predictions will be more accurate. So that will be my recommendation.
okay. So it sounds like, I mean, there's just so many different ways AI and machine learning can be used in so many different use cases. I mean, we've already discussed several of them. Um, I guess outside the world of retail and supply chain management, which is largely what we've been talking about here today, are there other really interesting or common or groundbreaking sorts of use cases or examples of how you're seeing your customers use Porio in the machine learning and AI world?
Specifically in the retail industry or more in
Or
general?
just more general, like you just the world in general, if you kind of look at all the companies using your product or use cases or examples that you've seen? Are there any other just interesting examples or uses of AI and ML that you've seen?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the most common one. Well, there are two different questions. What are the most common one, and what are the most interesting ones?
Sure.
Um, Most interesting ones, I'll just drop one because it's super interesting. It's called Project Dolly. Not sure if you saw that, but this is really cool project by OpenAI. It allows you to describe a situation, a scenario, a state, a picture, and it will draw a picture based on what you described.
Wow. That's
So yeah, so you can say, for example, I don't know, a guy sitting on a computer drinking soda in the 90s, 50s, or I don't know, something like that in Van Gogh style, and it will
wow.
draw that picture for you. So that's really interesting. It's mind blowing in my opinion. Super super interesting also from technical aspects.
Hmm.
So this is from the interesting angle.
Right.
For the common use cases, so this is not the common use case for the businesses, but what we see as common, I'll just mention a few of them, is churn prediction. You want to know which of your clients are going to churn, so you can act upon that ahead of time and make sure they are not churning. So churn prediction is one of them.
Hmm.
Fraud detection, credit risk, and there are plenty of others, but I think this is a good summary.
Interesting. Yeah, I could see financial services, that whole industry potentially being transformed by and dependent on AI and machine learning to help minimize their risk and their losses and that sort of thing. Um, Very interesting. And then I would imagine companies like Netflix or telecom companies, wireless providers, people that have a high amount of churn, I imagine that use case would be really powerful to them if you could sort of anticipate what type of customer is likely to churn and trying to counter that trend where possible. I can see that being very valuable to organizations like that.
Oh yeah, churn prediction, pricing. Like, how do you provide the right price? Right. On one hand, you don't want to leave money on the table. On the other hand, you want to offer an attractive price, so they will become a customer. So this would definitely be another use case. What deals to offer them so they will stay as customers. So also, once you've identified your existing customers as potential for churn, how you treat them is also something you can utilize machine learning for.
Hmm. Right. That's interesting. Uh, so Kyler over on LinkedIn asked the question: how do you monitor and maintain these models to ensure that they're functioning properly? I assume, when you first set up these models, they're not perfect, and nor will they ever be perfect. But how does that process work? Like, how do you monitor and maintain? And I suppose that's what your product does. That's what Aporia does. But maybe you could help us understand how, maybe not getting into the tech details of how it works, obviously, but just more conceptually, how do we maintain these models?
Sure. So first, what you just said is very, very correct. Once you release model to production, it will never be 100% accurate. There is no such a thing. Um, and then from that moment, as time goes by, the performance will degrade. Why? Because the world is changing, right? And the model was trained usually on a specific snapshot of reality. For example, the last 5 years. So that's just by the core nature of machine learning models. So then the question is, how do you track? How do you monitor them? Um, so first, it's important to have clear visibility to what decisions they're making for the business, and then also to measure the performance of these models. Now, this gets me to the question of how exactly do you monitor? Because in many of these use cases, the feedback is coming just later, right? Like
Mm,
we discussed it, months. In insurance companies, for example, it might come even years later. So what do you do until then? You can't be in the dark. So this is a classic use case for Aporia. In a high level, the way it works is like that. If you think about it, when we built the model, it has learned the snapshot of reality from the 5 years. Let's take it as an example. Before releasing it to production, we measured the success and we realized that the model was pretty much successful for the predicting the past 5 years historically. So that means we have here an implicit assumption that as long as reality behaves in a similar way to the past 5 years, the model is predicting pretty well. But as things are starting to change, for example, maybe we're starting to see different population, maybe we're starting to see activity in different hours, all these kind of things. So the data the model is receiving is starting to change from statistical behavior, and also the same way the predictions, the decisions that the model is making are starting to change over time and also compared to training.
Hmm.
That's when our system will alert and tell you, listen, something is changing. You should take a look into that. And if you think about it, when something is changing, doesn't necessarily mean it's changing for the bad, but it just makes it more of a flip of a coin. Now, you didn't invest a lot of money and you ran a machine learning model for flipping a coin. So
Right.
that's when maybe it will make sense even either to retrain your model, maybe fix the problem, maybe try an alternative heuristic instead in the meantime. So this is kind of how it works.
Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. Um, what about a question from Ronnie over on YouTube? Ronnie asks, "What open source AI technology would you recommend learning?" And thank you for this great contribution. So,
First, for
what would you say there?
okay, so first, thanks for the question. Um, if you so it depends on what you're trying to learn. If you want to learn machine learning and become a machine learning practitioner, there is a great course over Coursera by Andrew Ng. It's spelled Andrew Ng. So he has a great course in Coursera. If you'll just search for his name, you'll find it. It really teaches machine learning from the beginning. I think it's sponsored by Stanford. I highly recommend following it.
Okay. So Andrew Ing, and the last name is spelled NG, right?
Yes, just the letters N and G.
Okay, got it. So I guess just to bring this all full circle, and I appreciate all this great feedback you've provided, Lyran, and obviously the audience has had great questions as well. But just to sort of wrap it and tie it all together here, how should organizations get started on their AI journey? Because I think a lot of clients we work with, they're trying to just get the basics in place. They're trying to get their basic enterprise technology in place. They're trying to clean up their data. They're trying to consolidate data and systems. And so a lot of times they get overwhelmed by the amount of tech and organizational and operational change. But how do you recommend that if an organization really wants to embrace AI, machine learning, what are some of the first steps you typically recommend?
Yeah, so I'm very practical and I'm a very structured person, so that's my approach.
Right.
Um, but my recommendation will be identifying one only single use case where creating a change could mean a lot for the business. That's one. Number two, that you have enough data for this project and this use case. And then by having once you've identified this use case, it's important to identify to write down exactly what is considered as success. What are the KPIs and where should they reach in order to say this was a successful project? And once you have that, that's the time to hire data scientists and ML engineers, let them run on this project. And as they work on it, it's really, in my opinion, it's crucial to be aligned all the time on the business KPIs. We do see in plenty of cases where people are building machine learning models, but they're not necessarily tied enough to the business needs. So by tracking and monitoring how well this model is performing, I think this is crucial for getting a success.
That's great advice, for really not just AI, but a lot of technology initiatives is sort of pick a pilot or a targeted area that you can figure out how you could use that technology, learn from it, build the competency in house, and then you start to apply it to other use cases and other needs. And then eventually you start to become more um, versed in the technology and the ways it can help the business, and I could see that sort of cascading or percolating through the organization as you get some successes under your belt.
Yeah, and actually, to add one more thing here, which is important to understand about machine learning. So, in software engineering, usually you can have a good estimation of time of development, and you'll have your delivery by the end of the time. With machine learning, it's important to have in mind that every project is a research project. There is a question of whether the mission can be done in the first place, right? So even if we said this is the KPI we want to reach, we might not be able to do it. So
Hmm.
managing research is different than managing development. So while working on the project, it's important to have milestones and to have some deadlines and say, okay, do we still think it's a good idea? Do we still believe we can make a significant progress in this time frame, or maybe we should evaluate another opportunity to use machine learning?
Right, right. That's great advice. Um, well, good. Well, I appreciate you being here today, Liren. And again, it's Liren Hasen from the company Aporia. You can go to aporia.com to learn more about their solution and their company. But thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate your time here today. And again, thank you to the audience for being here as well. This entire recording will get edited and incorporated into our next recording of the Transformation Ground Control podcast, which will be released a week from tomorrow. Every Wednesday, you can find new episodes of Transformation Ground Control, which covers a technology agnostic view of digital transformation. And every Tuesday, we do these live streams as part of the podcast production. So I want to thank you all for being part of that live experience here today. So thank you all for being here. I hope you all have a great week. I hope you found this useful and helpful. And we'll see you next time on our Tuesday live stream. Take care, everyone. Have a great week.
Thank you, Eric.